Welcome to Single Parenting with Connection, Not Perfection, the podcast that honors your messy reality. It's the support you crave without the usual emotional landmines. I'm your host, Dr. Gila, and I promise I will never tell you to just tag your partner in. Before we start, quick reminder. While I am a licensed psychologist and a certified coach, this podcast is not coaching and it's not therapy, and it's not a replacement for medical or psychological advice. It is for educational and informational purposes only. All right, let's dive in. Hi there, Dr. Gila here. Today I want to talk about something that I don't think we talk about enough. There is a lot of focus right now on self-regulation for parents and emotion regulation skills. And I 1000% believe that that is important. In fact, it is episode number 2 in the podcast. If you have not listened to that yet, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. I think that self-regulation, emotion regulation is one of the top 2 skills that we need for interpersonal relationships, including parenting, with the other one being communication. And we'll talk more about that another time. But self-regulation is so important. And, as parents, I like to think of it as being part of our roots. So if you have a tree that has really firmly grounded roots, then when the storms blow, because they're going to blow, that tree is not going to fall over. And so building our self-regulation skills is so important as part of how we help keep our metaphorical tree from blowing over in all the storms. Having said that, self-regulation is not the only thing that matters. And something that I have noticed is this pendulum swing in the narrative in the parenting world. There's sort of this sense that if I could just get my self-regulation under control, everything would be fine, right? Everything would be unicorns and rainbows. And that kind of contributes to a little bit of a sense of like, I just need to learn how to grin and bear it. I just need to be able to take whatever comes my way, and stay calm and zened out. And that, of course, also contributes to guilt and shame and just this sense of, and I've heard parents literally say this, it's me. I'm the problem. I just need to figure out my stuff and get my self-regulation under control. And that is what matters. And, I, again, 100%, 1,000%, 1,000,000%, that is important. That is a huge part of the work. And there are 2 things that I think that we need to acknowledge here. The first is that even the most well-regulated person would struggle under some contexts, in some situations, right? So here are 2 examples, 2 pieces of it that I think are important to name. One, when your child is raging at you for 2 hours, they're hitting and kicking and screaming and trying to hurt you, it would take a saint for that not to affect your sync levels, as it were. So again, go back to episode 2 to learn more about my sync model of emotion regulation. But briefly, the idea is that we each have a metaphorical sink inside, and when the sink is really full, just a few more drops of water are going to make it overflow, and that's dysregulation. When your sink is emptier, you're going to be able to handle those same drops of water and then some. So if your child is having daily or frequent, intense, explosive, maybe violent, aggressive episodes, of course, that is going to leave you with a pretty full sink. It's going to be hard to keep your sink healthy and keep the water flowing through the drain and keep it from being in a state of fullness or overflow. I'm going to get back to this part, the kid piece, in a minute. Before I do that, I want to name another part of that, another context that really is part of why this is sort of fighting an uphill battle. And that is that society and the systems that we live in are not built to support you. So, as parents, and even more so as single parents, it really is an uphill battle. There are a lot of systemic barriers and challenges that you are not going to be able to fix right now. Now, of course, there are things that we can do in terms of advocacy work and activism to try to change some of these systems. But let's face it, right now, today, as you're listening to this, you're not going to wave a magic wand and fix all of the systemic barriers and challenges. And so I think it's important to name that because it's not just about us as parents learning to manage our emotions and, build healthier sinks and do the self-care practices. We are in a context, we are doing all of this in a context that does make this hard. And so I just want to acknowledge that elephant in the room that in some ways the cards are stacked against you. And I work with a lot of clients who are single parents of neurodivergent kids, kids who are, not necessarily fitting into the systems that are built for kids, which aren't enough anyway, just even for neurotypical kids. Um, and of course, our family structure isn't built the way that society expects and is built around. So there is this element where the cards are stacked against you. And so, what can we do about this? Well, like I said, of course, there are some things that we can do in terms of activism if you have the time and capacity for that, which I know might be hard because of all of these systemic barriers. I think it's important to give yourself permission to feel the feels, to have that pity party for yourself every now and then, to acknowledge that there are parts of why this is hard that are not your fault, and honestly, that you can't change. And it sucks, right? That's the reality. It sucks. And so giving yourself permission to acknowledge that and to recognize that and not taking all of the onus on yourself, I think is important. And along with that comes some work around acceptance. So there is a degree of acceptance that is necessary, I think, as single parents, especially single parenting a, differently wired kid, um, some degree of acceptance that the reality that you wish was true simply isn't, right? And that is what it is. It is the reality. And there are pieces of that we can't change. And so to some degree there is a level of acceptance. This is probably not the family structure and life that maybe you have expected, dreamed of, or even wanted. And so accepting that, accepting these kind of crummy pieces of it. It doesn't mean you have to love and embrace them, but acknowledging that this is the reality so that you can move forward instead of trying to change it. It's not about choosing between your ideal choice A or an alternative choice B. It's about choosing between desperately banging your head against the wall, wishing and hoping that choice A were possible and trying to make it work versus accepting that right now, at least, choice A is not possible, it's not realistic, and finding a choice B that is workable. It may not be ideal, but it is workable, and that can free yourself up to sort of move forward. Doing what you can within the crummy context that is around you. I also here want to recommend you listen to the episode on burnout. I believe it's episode 3 of the podcast. And this is my interview with Amanda Diekman, and she talks about the need for radical shifts in mindset and also sometimes in how we're structuring our lives to make things workable within the very real context that you're working in. All right, so that's my sort of soapbox about systemic barriers and also, this expectation that parents have or that society has for parents. It's a little bit of both that no matter what your kid is doing, no matter what's happening, what's coming your way, you need to be able to stay regulated. And by the way, I also think there's confusion that a lot of people think regulated means calm, and it doesn't. So that's maybe we'll talk more about that another day. But whatever it means, it is not always possible. So I want to get back to the kid piece because there's another part of this. So if your child is having pretty significant behavioral challenges, then it's not just an issue to take it all on yourself because even the Dalai Lama wouldn't be able to, or maybe they would. I don't know. I don't think the Dalai Lama has kids. So there you go. But, even if it were realistic for you to stay regulated in the face of really big, frequent, intense episodes with your kiddo, I think it is actually doing a disservice to your child if we exclusively focus on the parent piece. If we say all of it would all be fine if the parent could stay regulated. If you could co-regulate, that's the answer. And it's doing a disservice because it ignores one very important piece, which is that there is also stuff going on for your kiddo. And it's important for us to take the time and the energy and the curiosity to figure out why your child is having all these big behaviors. Behavior is communication, right? Behavior is communication. And I believe that kids do well when they can. I think Ross Greene is the one who originally said that. I believe everyone does well when they can, not just kids. But in this case, your child does well when they can. And when they can't, that is telling us that they are having a hard time. They are struggling and they need and deserve support. And that support, yes, absolutely has to do with your self-regulation as a parent and your ability to co-regulate with them. But that's not the only piece, right? So if you imagine, like, let's say there is a kid who's being bullied at school or who has an undiagnosed learning disability and they're really struggling at school, your self-regulation is certainly going to be helpful, but it's not going to address the main core problem of what's going on with your kiddo. So it's really important. And then, of course, they're all interrelated. So when you can understand where your child's challenges and big behaviors are coming from, it's easier for you to stay regulated. If you see your child as being obnoxious, defiant, right, trying to give you a hard time, all of these sort of negative framings of their behavior, then of course it's going to be harder for you to stay regulated because you're going to have a lot of anger and resentment and sort of outward energy about that. If we can instead shift it into why is my child having a hard time, not giving me a hard time? Why can't they do this? Then we can start to bring a more compassionate lens to it. It like automatically shifts you out of defensive and anger mode and into compassionate caretaking mode. Also, when we can understand what's going on with our kiddos, we can then support them and hopefully reduce the frequency and intensity of these behaviors. And then that's going to make it easier for you to stay regulated because if you're only handling one meltdown a week instead of one meltdown a day, that is going to be easier for you. And it's going to give your sink some recovery time and space. And then, of course, when you are better regulated, that is also going to help reduce your child's difficult behaviors. So all of it feeds each other, right? It's all an interconnected system. I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I like to think of it as being like a tree. And like a tree, each piece feeds each other. They don't work in isolation. So the parent piece is the roots of the tree. And like I said, this is really what's going to help keep the tree from falling over during those storms. But the trunk and the branches are important too. The trunk is the strength that you get from understanding what's going on with your child. So this is the child piece. And then the branches and the leaves and the flowers, that is the relationship and the connection piece. So I'll talk about all of that more another time. But the bottom line is that each of these pieces is interconnected. And so I just want to put that out there because while I think it is incredibly important to talk about and work on our emotion regulation as parents, I also just want to really take that time to name that it is not the only thing that's going on, and it's not the only thing that is worth your attention. So, for the next few episodes, we're going to focus on this piece of it, the kid piece. Next episode, I'm going to dive into a little bit about why kids lose it, some of the factors that might be contributing. And then I have a couple of great interviews for you that dive into individual pieces of this in a little more depth. I do also have a free PDF guide. I'll link to it in the show notes. And it is called Tantrums and Meltdowns and Rages. Oh my, a single parent's guide to understanding challenging episodes. So go ahead and pick that up. I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. That's it for this episode. I am so glad you found your way here. And remember, even if you're on your own, you don't have to do it alone. You've got this.